Good evening, everyone. We are now in First Kings chapter 19, reading from verse 1. Please remember that this chapter follows chapter 18. This word now is and then, basically telling us that whatever happened in chapter 18, after it concluded, then the narrative in chapter 19 took place. Now, we don't know how long that would be, but we left chapter 18 after the 450 prophets of Baal were slaughtered uh, in the valley of Jezreel. And then we find at the end, the rainstorm clouds were coming in, and the king Achav was riding in his chariot, and some spectacular event happened where old Elijah happened to move ahead of him and provided him with a forerunner role to announce his arrival at the town of Jezreel. Now, basically, we would find that King Ahav was convinced that Jehovah is truly God and Baal and the works of the 450 prophets were not. And so now we continue in chapter 19, verse 1. And then Achav told Jezebel. Now remember, Jezebel is the daughter of the king of Sidon. We read about the widow of Sidon, where Elijah was hiding earlier on in chapter 17. In chapter 18, we read of Elijah coming to want to see King Achav. And then we had the duel on top of Mount Carmel. Now, after that episode, Achav told Jezebel everything that Elijah had done. And what was the everything that Elijah had done? It says here, and how he killed all the prophets with the sword. So everything in chapter 18 was reported to Jezebel. Now we are coming to see a very strange relationship between Achav and Jezebel. Achav had control of 450 prophets. Jezebel had 400 prophets of Asherah who sat at her table. But Achav really opened up to Baal after he married Jezebel. That would be in chapter 16. So all these things about idolatry came because Achav had married Jezebel and followed after the gods and goddesses of the Sidonians. So now, after relaying this message, and obviously, if you think of verse 1, Achav would be very excited to explain that everything that Elijah did, seeing the fire that came down from heaven, that had burned up everything that is impossible, and demonstrated that the 450 prophets of Baal were false, Jezebel wasn't at all pleased. So we read now in verse 2. Then, this would be, and then, after what Achav had said, Jezebel then decided to send a messenger to Elijah. Understand this, the word messenger here is malak. Malak as a messenger is translated as messenger, and it's also translated as angel. This idea of malak, a messenger, means one who walks on behalf of another. And so here, Jezebel was the one who is asking someone to walk on her behalf to see Elijah, and that's how it should be read. And this is what she wants the messenger to say. It says, "So may the gods do to me, and more so, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like the life of one of them." Now, this essentially is, I guess you can call it an oath. The oath is made to the gods that Jezebel follows. And that would be the Asherah, that would be the Baal. These are the Sidonian gods that they may do to me. Now, this word gods here literally means Elohim. The word the gods means Elohim. This so may Elohim do to me, and more so, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life or your nephesh like the nephesh of one of them, the prophets, which is the 450 prophets who died. Now, it may be coming across as somewhat ambiguous, I would say, in some ways. But it would likely be here the gods would be the Elohim that Jezebel would serve. And I don't think it refers to Jehovah, the Elohim of Elijah. And so, but interestingly, if that is the case, then we find patterns that Jezebel was making an oath. She was swearing on the names of the gods that she serves. That if by this time the life of Elijah or the nephesh of Elijah is not taken away like how the 450 prophets were done, and then it will happen to her and more. I guess people in the ancient days can be quite exaggerating in the sense that she must be furious that 450 of the prophets of Baal had been slaughtered, and she really wants to take the life of Elijah. Now, in verse 3, we read this, and then it says, he was afraid, got up, ran for his life, and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and he left his servant there. We need to then take a look at this. And then he became afraid. It was after Jezebel had made the threat, because the messenger came to see Elijah and made the threat. The reason why I said that there's a strange relationship here between Achav and Jezebel is that it appears that Jezebel, the queen, appears to be more powerful than Achav, in the sense that even after Achav is truly convinced of what Elijah had done, he was overridden by the wife, Jezebel, and she controls the palace apparently. And so when the palace is upset with Elijah, so it made Elijah afraid, and then he got up, and then he ran for his life. And this word ran for his life literally means to walk away. It's not the word run, but walk away to save his life. This word is nephesh. It is to save his nephesh. save his soul, if you want to call it that way. And the question would be this: after all that was done on Mount Carmel, why wasn't Elijah fearless? He wasn't any fearful when he was facing 450 prophets of Baal, but he was very afraid of Jezebel. This is worthwhile asking this question, and many of the Jewish sages had debated this for a long time, and some of them came to the conclusion that the event at Mount Carmel was an act of God, that God had instructed him and God would provide all the powers to be, because the powers that you see, fire coming from heaven, wasn't because of Elijah. It was all because of God, and God with Elijah. He's got nothing to be afraid of. Now that that event is over and the rain had come back to convince Achav that God is almighty and powerful, it didn't convince Jezebel, and Jezebel appears to be the more authoritative in the palace. And so in this case, running away was the smart thing to do, because there is no divine special miracle that was told to Elijah that he can go and face off with Jezebel. And because of that, the right thing to do was for Elijah to run. Now, this time, instead of running to Sidon in chapter 17, he ran south. And he went to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah. In fact, it belongs to Simeon, but Judah is running the show there. And so think of it this way. If you look at the map, if this was the Sea of Galilee or the Lake of Tiberias, this would be the Jordan. And then we have the Salt Sea. Then you'll find that up to this point here would be Israel on top and Judah below. Beersheba is far below here. That would be the southernmost point of the land of Israel. Now, if you recall, the Bible often describes the north to south as from Dan to Beersheba. Dan would be further up north here, and Beersheba is down south here. And so from Dan to Beersheba would be the span of the length of the nation of Israel, the land. And he was far down south. He wasn't just down south of the border, but he was very, very far down. And he left his servant there. Now, some people think that this was Obadiah. Some people think that this was Elisha. Now, whatever it is, I don't think it's either of them. We're not told, so no point speculating. Verse 4, it says, after leaving the servant at Beersheba, he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, and he came and sat down under a broom tree. Now, this idea of a broom tree is really a juniper tree. Now, understand this: a juniper tree is a huge tree. Juniper is known as big trees, basically. And as big the tree they are, they would span enough to provide shelter and, I guess, shade. And it's got wide-ranging, I guess, branches. And so you find that for Elijah to actually sit there would be interesting. So he would sit here. And it was under the sun. Now, interestingly, he is frustrated, and he asked for himself to die. Now, the idea here to ask for himself to die, he is just saying, I'm totally confused. I did so many things for Jehovah, slaughtered the 450, came back to face King Achav, but now I myself is going to be killed by Jezebel. The throne, the palace is coming after me. And he says, enough. Now, Jehovah, take my life, for I am no better than my fathers. So this is an expression of frustration. Can a prophet be frustrated? Obviously. And his frustration is because he had done so much, but nothing happened to change the behavior of the Israelites. They have seen the magnificent show of the power of God, and yet they weren't bold enough to stand up to defend Elijah. And so Elijah wasn't about to test the loyalty of the Israelites. The work of the prophet generally in the mind of Elijah was to be able to go to the people, to rebuke them, exhort them, and see repentance and change in the nation. But it didn't happen even with the fire coming down from heaven. And so he was absolutely frustrated. We read now in verse 5, and then he laid down, fell asleep under the juniper tree. And then suddenly an angel touched him and said this to him, arise and eat. Now I want to point out to you that this word angel is malak. Same word as Jezebel sending one. And this would be an angel because in the context, it is not the messenger that Jezebel sent. It would be something else or someone else or some persons else. And by context, we see this as a spirit being, and a malak from God. It says, arise and eat. And thereby, in verse 6, and then he looked and he saw that at his head a round loaf of bread baked on hot coals and a pitcher of water was there. And so he ate and drank and lay down again. And there was food. This was interesting because the angel had prepared bread and water to sustain him, because it is to tell him there is no reason to die. Because he was hoping to die, now that he's eaten, nothing to die for. Verse 7, and then now we know the Malak is not just any Malak. We are told this Malak is the angel of the Lord. Now, what does that mean in Hebrew? This would be Malak Jehovah. If Malak is one who walks for another, and so when Jezebel sent the messenger, he will walk on behalf of Jezebel to say and speak everything that as if Jezebel had spoken. Now, in the old days, in the Chinese idea, you find 圣旨 being spoken that way when somebody brings the imperial edict, and whoever speaks the imperial edict or the orders that came, it is as if the emperor had spoken. And so when you see a Malak Jehovah, then this Malak is sent by Jehovah to speak to Elijah, and whatever the Malak says represents the word of God. So he came back a second time and touched him and said, arise, eat, because the journey is too long for you. So you are going to go on a journey. Verse 8, and then he arose, ate, drank, and then he walked on based on the food for 40 days and 40 nights. Now, this is something important. came to Horeb, the mountain of God. So let me just draw you where this place is. We were at Bir Shiva, where he left his servant. And then he took a day's journey further down. So we would assume it to be somewhere here. One day. And this is where the juniper tree is. Now, this is the Red Sea. And he would be possibly very close to Eilat. Now, what is interesting is he now goes for 40 days and 40 nights. And it would be southward towards the mountain of God, Mount Horeb. That would be Mount Sinai. So 40 days and 40 nights. That is somewhat of a very long journey. And so in that journey, he's brought back to where Moses was meeting God. And God wants to meet with Elijah there. So very quickly, you can now see that he came there to a cave. Now, this idea of a cave is a hole in the mountain. And he spent the night there, and behold, the word of the Lord came to him. Now, whenever you talk about the word of the Lord came to him, there is an audible voice. It's always through that speaking to the prophet. And God said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Now, this is important for us to understand. It is not that God doesn't know where Elijah is and why he is doing this. He's running away. But the question really is, what are you doing here in the cave in Mount Horeb when you are a prophet that you should be with the people? Now, that is the incident. And it is important for us to understand that in God's mind, the role of the prophet is for the people. It wasn't for himself. So here he said in verse 10, and then he said, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the Jehovah Tzevaot. But the sons of Israel has abandoned, atzav, abandoned, forsaken." I think that would be also a good word. Forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, killed your prophets with the sword, and I alone am left, and they have sought to take my life. Now, obviously, it's a bit exaggerating. There is still 150 prophets that Obadiah had saved. But right now, right here in Mount Horeb, he is about the only one because he's not in touch with anybody else. He is obviously looking at himself that he had to run away. And so he said in verse 11, God said, "Go out, stand on the mountain before Jehovah." And behold, Jehovah was passing by. Now, understand that this idea of passing by, that God was passing by, it's not that he saw the outline of God or anything else. In the ancient days, you need to understand that when something that is outside human control, like the weather, like the wind, like the earthquake, it is deemed to be an act of God. And so when he came out of the cave and looked outside, then in his mind, God was coming through. Why? Because a great and powerful wind was tearing out the mountains, breaking the rocks in pieces before the Lord. And then it says here, but God was not in the wind. How would he know? This is an expression, it's a learning experience for Elijah. He would see the wind as God. And so it's a powerful wind, not just a small breeze, but a powerful wind. It's a supernatural event had happened, but God wasn't there. And then he goes on to explain this. After the wind, there was an earthquake. And then it says, but Jehovah was not in the earthquake. How did he know that God wasn't there? I am not sure. But he seems to be sure because he cannot see any event that demonstrated God. Now, I think one of the things that the Hebrew culture people is very key for us to understand is that they are very concrete people. It's about things that they can hear, touch, feel, and see. And so God wasn't seen, and he didn't see anyone there. And that would be the conclusion in verse 11. And after the earthquake, a fire. But God was not in the fire. And then after the fire, a sound of a gentle blowing. Now, that is something which I think we can take a good look at. What you see now is that as he stood by the cave, which is a hole in Mount Horeb, he had seen the wind blowing. He had seen the earthquake shaking. Then he sees the fire burning. And in all the cases, these are spectacular events that is supernatural. But at the end of the day, there was a sound of a, and this word here is in verse 12, was a still small sound. It was a whisper, a calm sound. And it was very gentle. It was very soft. That is this. The sound is very calm and very soft. And then when Elijah heard it, in verse 13, this is, and then Elijah heard it. His response was he wrapped his face in the cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of a cave. And behold, a voice came to him and said, what are you doing here, Elijah? Here instantly, he can tell that is God. And so he heard. So understand this in the concrete way of the Hebrew people, after looking at what the wind did, looking at what the earthquake did, looking at what the fire did, he did not see God. He did not experience God. That's why he says the Lord was not in there. But the moment there was a gentle, calm, soft sound, he heard it. And think of it, the wind blowing very loud. The earthquake must be boisterous. The fire crackling. And then suddenly, absolutely silent, and he heard it. And he immediately knew it was God. So it was an experience. And he heard the same thing. What are you doing here, Elijah? Elijah said, I have been very zealous for the Lord, the Jehovah Tzevaot, for the sons of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they have sought to take my life. Very much the same answer. Verse 15. And then, now there is no and then here, so I'll just make a note. There is an and then in front. After Elijah made his reply, Jehovah God replied and said to him, "Go" means walk, return, two things. So one is walk, he has to move. Return means to go back to where you came from, on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. Now, Damascus is a different place. So the question now here is this: where did he go? So I want to point out to you that the place where he went would be from Mount Horeb. He would traverse all the way up this side. And that side, on the eastern side of the Jordan, will come eventually to Aram, Syria, basically. So when you have arrived, you shall anoint Hazael king over Aram, Syria. That's where he is going. Now, Syria is not Israel. And God wants Elijah to anoint Hazael. Now, this is not the traditional anointing of a Judah king or an Israel king. So anoint usually is about pouring oil over the head of the king. But in this case, it would be symbolic to appoint, would be another word of saying that he should go and appoint Hazael king over Aram. And then he is also to anoint Jehu, the son of Nimshi, king over Israel. And you shall anoint Elisha, the son of Shaphat of Avel Maholah, as prophet in your place. Now, these are all three very important things to do. Elijah is now phasing out. And when he's phasing out, he would not be doing all the major miracles, but there are things for him to do. One is to anoint Hazael. Two is to anoint Jehu. And right now is Achaz. Jehu is the grandson of Nimshi. The son of Nimshi is Jehoshaphat. And the son of Jehoshaphat is Jehu. And so Jehu is now designated to replace Achav. Just like when Samuel went to anoint David when he was very young, in place of Saul when the time came. So these are all in preparation for succession plan. The next one would be Elisha. Elisha would be his replacement, his successor. And so in verse 15 and 16, we're talking about a succession plan. Verse 17. And it shall come about that the one who escapes from the sword of Hazael, Jehu shall put to death. And the one who escapes from the sword of Jehu, Elisha shall put to death. This seems to be a prophecy that there will be a major destruction that's going to come. And all three of them are going to be involved. And no one is about to escape the judgment of God. Verse 18. There remain 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. These are the remnants. Now, it's not that there are no more than 7,000. It's commonly believed that there are more than 7,000 people in Israel. But at this time, after many had died, 7,000 still remains who are loyal to Jehovah, who refuse to bow to Baal. Bow means to kneel to Baal, to surrender to Baal. And so, verse 19, and then he departed from there, meaning here, found Elisha, the son of Shaphat, while he was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen in front of him. This is a very incredible event because very seldom do you have so many ox to plow. And he was with the last of them. And Elijah came over him and threw his cloak on him. And this is symbolic of an appointment. Every prophet is known by his cloak. Maybe there's a significant, unique pattern, but when somebody wears a cloak, you can really tell, oh, that must be Elijah. And Elijah threw the cloak on him, and Elisha would instantly know what that meant. We come to verse 20 and 21. After that episode, verse 20 says, and then, remember all the and thens would be after Elijah threw his cloak on Elisha. Elisha left the oxen behind, and then, so I just need to mark this down. And then he left or forsook the oxen behind, and then he ran after Elijah. Now, what does that mean? It means that after the cloak was thrown on him, Elijah kept walking. And then at the back came Elisha, and he was running after him, after Elijah. So this is the word after. After means behind, right? After means behind Elijah. And then the next word here is and then. There are a few and thens here. What does that mean? Well, after Elijah threw the cloak, the next thing that happened was he dropped everything and left the oxen behind, all 12 of them. And then he ran after Elijah, caught up with Elijah, and then he said this, please let me kiss my father and mother, and I will follow you. And Elijah, this would be Elijah, said to Elisha, yes, go back, for what have I done to you? So he says here, go back. What did I do to stop you from all this? What have I shown you? Now, without saying very much, and there's a lot of hidden messaging in between, Elisha understood when the cloak of Elijah was thrown over him, it signified that Elisha is to follow Elijah. And it is also a signal to show that Elisha will eventually replace Elijah. And so, this idea of please let me go back, kiss my father and mother, is essentially to kiss them goodbye. Because by the time they had said their goodbyes, Elisha will follow Elijah and will not be going back. And so in verse 21, we now read, and then you can see a sequence of events. And then he returned from following him, that is, from following Elijah. And then here it says, and then he took the pair of oxen, which he had 12. He, he didn't have to go anywhere else. He just took whatever he had. And then this word, and then. This word is not sacrifice. Although it's commonly translated as sacrifice, it is zavak. Zavak literally means slaughter. Slaughtered them, not sacrifice as sacrificing to God. Slaughtered them. And then the next one is, and cook their meat with the implements of the oxen. That would be the plows and the plowshare. He didn't have to go anywhere to look for wood. The last one here is, and he cooked the food. And then this word is, and then, after giving everything, preparing everything, gave it to the people, and then they eat. And then they ate. Then finally, we have the final words here. Then, and this would be, and then after eating, he got up. He got up, and then he walked after Elijah, and then served him, became his servant. So let's wrap up to understand this. Elisha understood what the cloak being placed on him. He understood what he's supposed to do. He understood his tenure of the role. He understood he has to say goodbye to his father and mother. What that would be paying respects. Remember in the Ten Commandments, honor your father and mother, pay importance to them. You just don't disappear. This is an Eastern culture. And so he kissed them goodbye. He celebrated that this is going to be his last meal with the family and with all the people. They ate. And then after all this done, he got up and he followed Elijah and he served him. He is the understudy to see how it's done and to learn from Elijah before he goes away. Now, that is the whole idea. Serving him, not just following, but serving him, is something which Elisha understands. To replace Elijah, he has to know exactly what and how Elijah does things. And then when the time comes, he would know exactly what to do. So this would be the end of chapter 19.